have a couple, let's call them hobby interests that I've been studying since college. Psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, health and fitness, and spirituality. But the more I research each of these things as if they are separate, the more connections I see between them. And I have had some epiphanies that I'd like to share. This is by no means a complete explanation. This is just a flyby attempt at getting it on the table. I could spend hours explaining all of this in real detail, and frankly, I think that would be worth it. But believe it or not, this is my attempt at being brief. The punchline here will be that practicing at being in a spiritual state is good for psychological well-being and physical health, and that you can't ignore your physical health and psychological well-being without also attending to your spiritual side. Mind, body, and spirit are connected, and all streets run both directions. So for context, I consider myself kind of a spiritual, non-religious person, meaning I take issue with most religions, and I found Buddhism and the Yoga Sutras more instructive than other traditions. And here's why. I think spirituality is to be experienced, not to be believed. Spiritual experience is just a part of being human, even without religious beliefs or dogma. We can all have experiences that bring us to use words like soul and spirit and God to describe. We don't just live in a world of objects. We have rich internal landscapes, varied states of consciousness, and experience our life through a spiritual dimension. We can all experience forms of self-transcendence, where the sense of self kind of disappears and melt away. I like to use the metaphor that Jonathan Haidt used in his TED Talk. He says to think of your mind like a house with many rooms. You might spend most of your time in just a handful of rooms that you know really well. And sometimes it's as if a door opens up out of nowhere, and behind the door, there's a staircase. You climb the staircase and experience a state of altered consciousness. It's beautiful, inspiring, uplifting, and really difficult to describe. So we use metaphors like up and down, like feeling uplifted or elevated, or to say heaven is up. In its full effect, this kind of spiritual transcendence is an out-of-body experience of the sublime. It's the thing that meditators and yogis are after, the thing that psychedelics shortcut to. This type of transcendent experience is a function of consciousness, and therefore, anyone with a consciousness has the potential to tap into this state. Accounts of it span across time, geographies, and cultures. The point is, it's a universally accessible experience, but you might call it something different depending on the angle that you come to it from. Jim Palmer, the founder of the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality, beautifully laid it out this way. You might call it God, Brahman, Sunyata, monism, Great Spirit, non-duality, big mind, the unmoved mover, Apeiron, demiurge, the unmanifest, the absolute, transcendence, quantum field theory, Tao, Rigpa, source, peak experience, consciousness, or love. It doesn't matter what you call it. If you've experienced it, you know that they're all just failing to capture the experience that is beyond words. In the 1960s, Abraham Maslow, the same guy as the hierarchy of needs, advocated that we take up this topic for scientific exploration. He published a book called Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences, in which he took hundreds of accounts of this kind of transcendent experience and bulleted out the shared characteristics across all of their stories. His list was 25 bullets long, and each item is worthy of deeper discussion, but I'll paraphrase now. 1, the universe is perceived as a unified whole, a clear perception of the oneness of everything. The universe is all one piece, and you have a place of belonging in it. 2, disorientation of time and space. 3, ego transcending, self-forgetful, egolessness. 4, feeling more of a psyche and less of a thing. 5, non-evaluating, non-ranking, non-judging, everything is equally important. 6, non-striving, non-needing, non-wishing. 7, it elicits feelings of wonder, awe, reverence, humility, surrender, and worship. Experiencing a state of deep concentration or clarity of mind. Able to humbly listen and hear. Loss of fear, inhibition, or self-defense. An ability to perceive from a more detached vantage, that the world, people, objects are not to be used or reacted to. External objects, nature, and others are not for human purposes, but that being is an end in itself. Meaning, to exist is sacred. Everything is beautiful, good, desirable. Even the bad is accepted more totally than at other times. Having the experience reconciles people to the presence of evil in the world. I'm at 14. Evil is understood as a product of limited or selfish vision and understanding. The response is not to blame, condemn, feel disappointment or shock, but to feel pity, charity, kindness, sadness, or even amusement. 15. Dichotomies, polarities, and conflicts of life are transcended and resolved. A reconciling of paradox, integrating unity and away from splitting, conflicts, and oppositions. 16, feeling more self-determined, responsible, active, and the creative center of one's own activities and perceptions. More free will. A tendency to move toward a perfect identity or uniqueness. Appreciating one's own idiosyncrasies and wanting to be their real self, to become a more real person. 18, the dichotomy between humility and pride is resolved. Proud in a sense and humble in a sense. No hubris, paranoia, or masochism. 19, more loving and accepting, so more spontaneous, honest, and innocent. 20, feeling lucky, fortunate, and graced. It leads to a desire to do something good for the world, an eagerness to pay back, a sense of dedication. The concept of heaven that emerges from a peak experience is a sense that it exists all the time, all around us, and is always available to step into, at least for a little bit. But there's not just a one and done thing. People often report ongoing effects afterward, including feeling changed, transformed, or call it born again. 23. One way that there is an ongoing effect afterward is that it's referred to as a unitive consciousness, meaning a sense of the sacred can be glimpsed in and through the particular instances of the momentary, the secular or the worldly. So if you've seen the movie Soul, think of the turning leaves at the end, the busker, just walking. It is an ends experience, meaning that it's valuable in and of itself. It's not a means to other outcomes. And 25, it is self-validating, self-justifying, so great and high in experience that it justifies not only self, but even life itself. It gives meaning to life. Okay, but here's the thing about this list. These aren't conclusions that people drew because they thought about it. They didn't come to this understanding through prefrontal cortex thinking. No, it's more going into this state of consciousness, regardless of how you thought before, and coming away with a visceral knowledge of these things as a universal truth, like big T truth. Okay, so let's say that in this alternative state of consciousness, all 25 apply. But you might be thinking, well, I've had lots of experiences that I would call spiritual without being like out of body, right? Well, sure. We often feel deeply connected to others, a sense of agape love, a self-transcending ends experience. But does that always qualify as an alternative state of consciousness, whatever that means? So let's place spiritual experience on a spectrum where this transcendent alternative state of consciousness is at the right end with all 25. And as less of these characteristics apply, further to the left, you would place it on a spectrum. While I'm here, there's another alternative state of consciousness that's defined by a particular combo of these things, and that's flow state. There's entire books on flow. I'll circle back on it later, but in the meantime, I'm going to drop it on the spectrum between transcendent enlightenment on the right and call it crypto spiritual experience to its left. And there's a whole spectrum of gradients in between. So, okay, how do you have an experience that's on this spectrum? One recommendation is to chase right after each of these 25 feelings and philosophies by cultivating them in your daily life. Practice living and breathing these concepts as wholly as possible. Make them the object of contemplation. For example, it's very vogue right now to have a gratitude practice, taking time to deliberately cultivate gratitude every day. Contemplate how we are connected and one. Ponder paradoxes that hold both truths. Start with that prefrontal cortex thinking. Aim to be non-striving and non-judging. Try to be more loving and forgiving. Cultivate awe at the magnificence of the universe, and sit in wonder that your existence is sacred. Or I pulled together this list from across different religious and philosophical traditions and activities where practitioners report spiritual experience straight out of Maslow's 25. They're things like inspiring story and words, sacred spaces and ritual, music and singing, nature, meditation and prayer, fasting, art, sex, yoga, tai chi, energy work, breath work, chanting, drumming, dancing, cold plunging, and psychedelics. These are all things that you might do for another reason, like just because we enjoy doing it. It's an ends experience, but discover within them brushes with the sublime. Interestingly, the list for getting into flow state is pretty similar. Instead of just inspiring story or words, the typical lists say things like reading, making music, and singing. Not just nature, but with a deeper immersion in doing, such as gardening, creating art, running. So runner's high is one form of flow state. You can also get into it through swimming, biking, surfing, rock climbing, training, sports, yoga, tai chi, energy work, martial arts, drumming, dancing. These are all things that immerse you wholly in the moment into the activity of doing what you are doing, where worry and stress about external distractions, what has happened in the past or what might happen in the future, disappear. Notice that these are all really physical things, like things that you do with your body. You don't have to have faith in anything. You don't have to believe a certain way. No person or book has to shape your thinking first. If you just go into these things without clinging to any belief, just with an open heart and open mind, then the doors to the stairway are more likely to open to you. You don't have to take anyone else's word for it. Set all of that aside for a moment. Okay, clean slate. Imagine that you wanted to be as healthy and physically fit as possible. Who cares about spirituality? You just want to live a long and healthy life. So what are the things that you could do to be at peak performance? Here we go. Diet is going to be the first thing that you're going to hear, right? Diet. The foods that you eat have a huge impact on the functioning of internal organs and tissues, hormones in your blood, your immune system, and the trillions of microbes running the show in your first brain, the gut. 2, exercise. Moving your body and inducing hermetic stress. You can do that by running, high-intensity interval training, swimming, biking, surfing, rock climbing, sports, yoga, dancing. There are lots of fun ways to move your body. Find ones that bring you joy. Saunas and cold plunging. Spending time in nature. I recommend the Nature Fix for a great book explaining the benefits of time outdoors, including the physiological changes that impact health. 5, breath work. Not only does how you breathe impact the oxygenation of your blood from vital organs to your skin and extremities, but it's good for your vascular system. And when you exercise to lose weight, 84% of the fat is turned into carbon dioxide and leaves the body through the lungs. The remaining 16% is sweat and pee. We lose weight because we breathe harder. I recommend the book Breath by James Nestor for a more thorough account. It's fantastic. Okay. 6, avoid foods that will knock out your gut microbiome, basically sugar, partially hydrogenated oils, highly processed food. Eat lots of vegetables and fermented foods that build it back up instead. Of course, get good sleep, drink plenty of water, and fasting. A religious practice, yes, but in the fitness community, we refer to it as intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. So there's a relationship between the list of activities that we do for physical health and the things that we do for spiritual experience. And there's a relationship between spirit and mental health. Check this out. Here's an interesting parallel. The desired outcomes of many forms of therapy actually align with Maslow's list of 25. In a transcendent state, we feel connected to the universe as a whole, a place of belonging in God. And therapy often seeks to address a person's sense of belonging. In The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk says that many psychological issues are social issues. As social creatures with an intrinsic need to feel belonging, we depend on social support and a sense of security and belonging within a social tribe. We become anxious and depressed when the social relationships that we should be able to depend on betray us. We feel shame when we internalize being unworthy of love and belonging. Concentration, clearing brain fog and regaining clarity of mind. Reorientation of one's sense of self. Therapy helps to move from up the spectrum from dissociation and self-absorption through self-consciousness and into self-awareness. It helps to accept the bad, reconciling patients to the presence of bad or evil in the world. Understanding others' behaviors or evil as a product of limited or selfish vision and understanding. Therapists might reframe how we understand, say, our parents' behavior, so that instead of condemning and blaming those that have hurt us, we might feel some pity, charity, and forgiveness. Able to humbly listen and hear. Dichotomies, polarities, and conflicts of life are transcended and resolved, integrating unity and away from splitting, conflicts, and opposition. A loss of fear, inhibition, of defense, and the need to control. Overcoming fears, eliminating hubris, paranoia, and masochism. Help patients embrace their own identity or uniqueness or the idiosyncrasy of the person to be his real self, to become a more real person. To restore an internal locus of control so patients can feel like a responsible, creative center of his activities and his own perceptions. More self-determined, a more free agent with more free will. More loving and accepting. And to help patients create meaning from their experiences, which leads to post-traumatic growth, even to help them give meaning to life itself. But therapy has been changing and coming a long way over the past decade in particular, due in large part to advancements in understanding the relationship between the mind and the body. Therapy might help you to think differently in these ways, but thinking differently in your head requires changes in your body. We used to think that your mind, were up here in your brain, just driving around your old meatbag body like something straight out of Men in Black. But what's happening in your body has a huge impact on the thoughts that you're thinking in your mind. Your mind and body are not so separate. The brain sits up in the black box of your skull, and the way that it knows the world is by way of sensory inputs. That includes vision, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the sensory inputs of what's happening within the body. We use the term interoception to refer to feelings in the body, from internal organs and tissues, hormones in your blood, immune system, and the trillions of microbes in your gut. You can actually feel what is happening in your body, at least in broad strokes. It would take a lot of brain power and therefore energy to feel and process all of that with precision. And frankly, it would be super overwhelming. So we just have a general sense of what's happening in the body, and there are also subconscious signals happening as well. The whole of what's happening in the body, the mix of hormones, the organs that are getting the energy, the areas that are put on hold, I'll refer to as the body cocktail. These different body cocktails, the various recipes, are the origins of feelings, the core ingredients of emotions. I recommend How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett for a deeper understanding of how our emotions are made through a process of prediction based on past experience and course correction, as additional sensory inputs help to eliminate prediction error. Your nervous system plays a huge role in this process. It's your nervous system that's managing the subconscious responses to what's happening and communicating with the brain about what body cocktails it predicts are most effective in each situation. So let's talk about the nervous system. You have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the digestion of food, expulsion of waste, and maintenance actions that work best in a state of relaxation. It sometimes gets the label rest and digest, and more lately, safe and social. You also have a sympathetic nervous system, which you've probably heard referred to as fight or flight. When you sense danger, this is what causes you to react without having to think about it first. If you think, it could take too long in a moment where there is no time to waste. It makes predictions and kicks off body cocktail recipes so that you'll react in life-saving ways. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems usually work together in something called dual innervation, but one sometimes dominates over the other one depending on the needs of the organism, whether fight, flight, freeze, or rest and digest and long-term health and cellular maintenance makes the most sense in a given moment. How effective you can switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic can be measured through heart rate variability, or HRV. I'm going to come back to this later because it's one of the indicators of the relationship across these different things. For a short-term threat, like pulling your hand away from a hot burner before you even think about it, it's only a moment of fight or flight taking the driver's seat. You got a dose, but maybe not a deluge of neuromodulators. That's one body cocktail. A traumatic accident, freeze response, a different cocktail. A prolonged situation where you just can never quite feel completely at ease, like feeling socially on edge, that's another recipe. We could place each of these different levels of distress or feelings on a spectrum. Feelings of worry, irritation, frustration, hopelessness, numbness, sadness. In physically and socially safe spaces, you can feel calm, grounded, connected, curious, compassionate, patient, and kind. You are also more likely to be spontaneous, to innovate, feel creative, or inspired. And that's all tied back to what's happening within your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, how you feel within the body. So to recap, your brain is constantly taking in the world through sensory experiences, predicts what it's going to need to do, which body cocktail is the right one for a given situation, and taking in the world, predicting what's happening, the nervous system communicates so that you can respond, and the body puts energy into stimulating and inhibiting different processes, which you are and aren't directly conscious of, but you get a general sense of through interoception. You subconsciously pair the body cocktail with the circumstances based on all the data points across past experiences, name your feelings by an emotion category, and thereby create meaning in your life. Okay, whew. The nervous system is a vast and complex network, but the real star here is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, which serves as the communication superhighway between the body and the brain. It's composed of 20% efferent fibers, sending signals from the brain to the body, and 80% are afferent fibers, sending information from the body into the brain. That's a lot of bottom-up information. It is the key player in interoception. The vagus nerve has three main branches: the dorsal, sympathetic, and ventral vagal nerves, each connecting to different organs to communicate what's going on to the brain and stimulate and inhibit different actions and mix up different body cocktails, some subconscious and some within the realm of sense perception or awareness. It's your vagus nerve that regulates involuntary bodily functions, including heart rate, respiratory rate, digestion, and glandular activity. And I want to highlight a couple specifics here. So 95% of your serotonin lives in your gut lining. So that happiness hormone getting up to the brain depends on good gut health and the vagus nerve superhighway. The vagus nerve is involved in the regulation of inflammation. Short-term, inflammation helps us to combat sickness and heal, but long-term causes a whole host of physical and, you guessed it, psychological problems. So thank goodness for the vagus nerve modulating immune response and reducing inflammation through its anti-inflammatory effects, so long as it's getting stimulated and functioning properly. Through his work establishing polyvagal theory, Dr. Stephen Porges recognized the connection between the three branches of freeze, fight or flight, and rest and digest. Each communicates to manage different physiological responses in the organs that they're connected to, each with a different spectrum of emotion categories. After a traumatic event, the mind-body connection can get messed up. We tend to misread cues and view the world, social situations, and people as being more hostile because we're on the defense after a traumatic experience, meaning we can actually become desensitized to what our body is feeling, and we can read the efferent information coming up the vagus nerve differently in the brain. So we are misreading the cues outside of us and the cues inside of us. Trauma can cause us to become both hyposensitive and hypersensitive to our feelings and to pain. In a life-threatening situation, it helps to feel numb. Like if you break your leg, you still have to run on it to get away. So it's possible to dissociate, to numb yourself from the pain. We don't stop making the body cocktail, but we can numb ourselves to feeling it through the vagus nerve. Porges placed the 3 branches on a ladder and developed strategies to help heal trauma and move patients from dysfunctional patterns associated with the dorsal and sympathetic branches so that they can more readily move up the ladder into states that are healing to the body and allow cellular maintenance. By the way, it was HRV that turned him onto this. Van der Kolk says that we cannot feel wholly human until we experience our whole life and feelings in all of their visceral dimensions. Healing requires that we feel what we feel and know what we know. And numbing ourselves, suppressing not just feeling, but the thoughts and memories is one way that we protect ourselves and do ourselves harm. Trauma can dampen long-term receptivity and feedback loops through the vagus nerve. Hypersensitivity is another possible outcome. It can manifest in feeling pain from a soft touch or having big, volatile emotions. We can get overwhelmed and instead of meeting the demands of life's challenges, move into fight or flight. We're more likely to have brain fog and disorganized thoughts. In both cases, we become more likely to misread the cues from within our own bodies. We can improve emotional regulation and our interoceptive feedback loops by practicing at feeling what's happening in our body, by practicing at objectively noticing what we are feeling, and by having a better vocabulary for naming our emotions with more nuance. Concentration meditation, mindfulness, and physical activities give us opportunities to feel what we feel and help us to distinguish between the feelings and their physiological sources. Rather than showing dorsal vagal freeze on the bottom, sympathetic fight or flight in the middle, and ventral vagal safe social on the top of the ladder, I'm going to turn his model on the side to make it a horizontal spectrum going left to right. This is basically polyvagal theory, but do you see where this is going? If we put Stephen Porges' ladder next to the spectrum of spiritual states of consciousness from left to right, this is what it looks like. In the decades since polyvagal theory, therapy has evolved from traditional talk therapy to expand into a growing cadre of somatic therapies working to restore the virtuous cycles of our body systems, hormonal production, and receptivity by stimulating the vagus nerve and retraining the nervous system and reintegrating the mind-body connection. We can do this in a number of ways. We can still take a top-down talk therapy approach to working on what and how you think, but we can also take a bottom-up approach, allowing the body to have visceral experiences separate from the life-threatening, socially threatening, or fear-inducing experiences. If you know what fires together wires together, this is basically a decoupling of the physiological responses from their negative emotion origins. You can feel sweat, elevated heart rate, rapid shallow breath, and vascular contraction while being in a self-affirming, positive emotional state. In The Body Keeps the Score, Van der Kolk says that trauma is a disease of not being able to feel what we feel or know what we know, to not be fully alive in the present moment. Well, we have a whole list of activities that we know are good at bringing us into the present moment. So running, taking up a sport, swimming, surfing, yoga, dancing have all landed on the therapists recommend category. Cold plunging, water temperatures under 64 degrees Fahrenheit will suffice, is a form of hermetic stress with proven effects on improving anxiety, depression, chronic pain, clearing brain fog, and it is super good for your body and mind. It exercises your vascular muscles, stimulates the vagus nerve, and you have to calmly breathe through it just to survive, or at least that's how it feels.
but you do it on purpose, knowing that it's good for you. You have an internal locus of control, and practitioners often report self-transcendent, light of your soul spiritual experiences. Hormetic stress is a form of positive stress that builds resilience within the body. By exposing your body to just the right amount of stress, you begin to develop greater distress tolerance, which helps you to recover faster from stressful experiences. Examples include high intensity interval training, lifting weights, distance running, hot saunas, cold showers, fasting. Each of these examples stimulates the vagus nerve, impacts how deeply you breathe, and improves HRV. Creating music, and especially singing and chanting, stimulates the vagus nerve. Add meditation, creating art, Tai Chi, Qigong, and drumming to the list of vagal stimulating activities. HRV improving things, well documented psychological benefits. And many of these activities provide safe spaces and an element of ritual that allows the nervous system to know that it's okay to go into rest and digest and safe social mode. We can't talk about mental health and disrupted body systems without also talking about diet or sleep. Nutritional psychology is another growing field as we amass more and more research showing the connection between particular foods and moods. Dysbiotic gut microbiomes are correlated with anxiety and depression, which is exacerbated by some foods. Therapists often ask patients about their quality of sleep. We've all been kept awake by disrupted thought patterns. Attending to how we are thinking helps us to sleep better, and vice versa. Add sleeping to the list of things that helps us to regulate our emotions more effectively. Oh, and there's this technique called EMDR, which is used for addressing PTSD. Basically, patients think through traumatic memories while essentially mimicking rapid eye movement, which is the stage of sleep that takes all the data points of an experience and integrates them into memory, placing them in time as a thing of the past. Finally, we are social creatures. We have nervous systems that actually co-regulate with the people around us that we are physically around. Being with people that are chill helps us feel more chill. Being around anxiety-ridden nutballs puts us on edge. Since many psychological issues are rooted in social problems, broken trust, shame, or being on high alert around emotionally volatile tribe members, then physically being around people in safe, intimate, and enjoyable social relationships helps us to retrain the nervous system to heal physiologically. Psychedelics, once used in religious rituals, are increasingly being used in psychiatric practices as well, typically combined with talk therapy to treat illnesses such as addiction, depression, anxiety, PTSD. So to recap, therapy aims to address disruptive thought patterns by helping us to think and feel the same as we do as a result of spiritual experience. And somatic therapies help us to address the predictive tendencies toward fight or flight and freeze and more readily mix up body cocktails up the spectrum into rest and digest and safe and social. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said enlightenment is the normal, natural state of health for the body and the mind. It results from the full development of consciousness and depends upon the perfect and harmonious functioning of every part of the body and nervous system. If therapy and spirituality are 2 points on the same spectrum, then the way to climb the ladder is by cultivating physical health and developing contemplative practices that align with Maslow's 25. And the more you do, the more you train your nervous system to mix up body cocktails associated with staying on the right end of the spectrum. There's one problem with that whole conceptualization. I kind of just framed dorsal and parasympathetic vagal functions as bad and ventral vagal and spiritual as good. But you can have healthy functioning across your entire body and vagus nerve. So then what? Then it might look more like this. And by the way, I think that kind of takes some of the mysticism out of chakras. So I wish you a life free from suffering in a natural state of health for the body and the mind. And may you through that ignite your spirit. Holy shit, did you just stick with me through that whole explanation? I feel like it was long, but also I just breezed right past so much. I want to build it out. I want to share all of the studies, explain the details and stories, have it cited, include the things that I skipped past, like that some of the data points informing the nervous system from past experience are actually generational. It doesn't have to be your past experience that has wired you to particular responses. I haven't talked about that in terms of triggers and what that actually means. How many of the things we do for physical health and spiritual practice actually promote tuning into your interoception, but they actually help you to improve your ability to feel what's happening within your body. Things like how glucose spikes and crashes behave like trauma in the brain over time, disrupting interoceptive feedback loops. There is so much more to cover, and I want to do justice to what I've covered here. So if you're interested in learning more, stick with me, please subscribe. There's so much more to come. Thanks.